Welcome everyone to the AP Trust Begging Interest Group. I think formerly we're the Begging Best Practices Interest Group, but I never get the full name in there correctly. And we're here today to learn from our colleagues at University of Miami on how you get stuff to AP Trust. So it'd be interesting to hear about what your repository, your content management system looks like, and how you are piping stuff off, and how you make choices between individual objects or collections, and so we can dig in. I'm going to turn everything over to Paul Clow from the University of Miami. Take it away, Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate the chance to share our workflow, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. I would characterize our workflow as a pretty simple one, and let's see, I guess let me give some background before I jump into things. So the University of Miami has been a member of AP Trust. They were part of the kind of the second wave of participants after the initial founding of AP Trust. And for a few years, I think like a lot of other institutions and members, we didn't ingest very much into AP Trust. That started in earnest a few years ago. One of my former colleagues, Jamie Little, kind of spearheaded our initial transfers to AP Trust. When he left the University of Miami at the beginning of last year, I kind of took over that process, and I was kind of charged with not just taking it over, but kind of amping it up, because we had, like I said, been members for a few years, but we had very few collections actually stored in AP Trust, and we weren't using our allotment, our standard member allotment of storage. So at the time, I kind of wanted to jump in and get started with that. The colleague I mentioned had started to put together some kind of comprehensive systems for transferring files back and forth. However, the documentation for that stuff was left something to be desired for someone who wasn't involved in actually building the system. So I spent a little bit of time trying to get those working, and ultimately, due to some improvements in the AP Trust system, I actually kind of sidestepped that whole system. And I can kind of show you where we are today now. I am a big fan of Unix and using Unix-like tools. So that is what I've done here. Hopefully everyone can see my screen okay. On my left, I don't know what you're looking at, but I've got the spreadsheet. So our management basically involves the tried and true spreadsheet. We have a couple of hundred collections that have been ingested. When I started, this was just a small subset of these collections, which were kind of earmarked for being transferred. And they were primarily, we kind of started focusing on the larger collections that led to some of the issues at the beginning, though, because of AP Trust. The first version of AP Trust had a maximum file size, which wasn't ideal for our collections. When I took over the project, because of version 2, that maximum file size had increased from, I think it was 250 gigs to now it's 5 terabytes. So 5 terabytes fits almost all of our collections. And so we took a little bit of a different tack than most. I think a lot of people transfer individual files to AP Trust. We choose to bag up the entire collection and move them all at once. And I can kind of show you how that process works here in just a second. Again, well, we have standard identifiers for all of our collections, so that's what you see in the left-hand column. Those identifiers is what we use throughout the file system to move those files. The files themselves are stored on an archive server. So what we're uploading are the original TIFFs that we're creating from the digitization process. Those TIFFs are loaded into ContentDM, and derivatives are created there for display to the users. But the TIFFs are moved to an archive server, a file server, and that's the files that we actually transfer to AP Trust. And the way that that process works is that I get a list of these collections from the Digital Collections Committee that we have here at University of Miami. So they actually review all of our collections prior to digitization and make note of things like whether it should be archived, whether it's destined for AP Trust. And they have a whole kind of selection criteria that they use, a matrix that they use to kind of figure out what is destined for AP Trust and what isn't. Once they've identified those records, that's kind of where I come in, and I can start showing you what is a pretty simple process that I've been following. The first step is basically for a few different reasons, we actually use an intermediary server. So I have to actually move over to a server hosted by our central IT department. And this, the reason why I use this server is, one, it was hosting some of the AP Trust software that my colleague was building, but also it hosts a very large storage is attached to this, because you need, you know, not just enough storage to hold the collection, but some slack space in order to do some of the bagging utilities. So I move over to the server, and as I said, basically this entire process is at the command line, which I'm very comfortable in. So so that's kind of how I've chosen to work through this process. Once I'm here, anybody who has used the command line or anything like that probably has run into a situation where they've been working on a server and then had to do something else, like take their computer to a meeting or go home for the day or something like that. That happens to me too, of course, and I have very large collections that I'm transferring to AP Trust. So they take a long time, and it would be a big hassle to interrupt them. So I use something called TMUX, which is a terminal multiplexer, which is a fancy way of saying that this allows me to set it up so that I can personally disconnect from the server, and then this process continues running in the background. So,
can I ask a question, Paul?
Sure.
How does that differ from using NoHub and putting the job in the background?
It's a similar process. NoHub allows you to kind of stay within a single terminal session. This actually creates another terminal session running independently on the server. So one of the benefits of this TMUX program is that when I detach from the console here, I can detach, and then when I can reconnect to the server and reattach to that session. And it will actually reattach like in mid-session. So if there are files transferring, you know, and the numbers are changing, when I reattach, they continue changing in my terminal as soon as I connect. Thanks. So there's another very similar program called Screen. That one is, I think, more widely used. TMUX is like the artisanal fancy coffee version of Screen. And so what I do is then use a command something like this. Now this is a little bit overly complicated, so I'm going to try to bring in an explanation of it that I have up here. Sorry. And so I'm not sure if you can see this whole thing. So basically, and I don't want to make sure I don't have any passwords in there. No. So basically what this command is doing is the rsync part at the beginning here is moving the files from the archive server to this machine that we're working on right now. At that point, it uses a tool that I have been using, the NCSU created, so North Carolina State University. As I mentioned, the tools that were previously used here at University of Miami were a little unwieldy for me to get started with. So I did a little bit of sleuthing around, and I found that NCSU had published this AP Trust Baggett project on GitHub, and it basically does exactly what I want it to do, which is you point it at a directory and it bags it up and it sends it to an S3 bucket that you identify. There was one kind of little minor issue when I started using it about the chunk size, but you can see May 5th of last year, I actually made a small fix and then sent in a pull request to NCSU so that it works even with very large collections. That was the issue at the time. So I use this, which is a little Python program, AP Trust Baggett. So that does the actual bagging. And that is this section here. And then once that's all done, I just remove it from the folder here. You can, well, you probably can't see, but this, this command is from my history. So I had just kind of went up. I've already transferred this collection. So what I do here is I use, again, a little bit of Unix magic to, oops, to edit that. So what I've basically just done is open that command in an editor that I use called V, which makes it very easy to change the portion of the command that I need to. So what I've done is actually selected this kind of baby collection here, which says it's 9 megabytes. I don't know if it's actually that small, but we'll find out. And what I do is I actually just change the command to reflect the collection name that I am interested in. So now you can see this is now matches the collection identifier. When I quit out of there, now it's actually just, oh. Although I use Unix a lot, it's still very finicky. So basically I was just in the wrong directory just then, and it was trying to look for a relative path that it didn't find. But let's see, there you go. It actually was 9 megabytes. So that bag is actually gone now. It went off to, so that command just transferred the files to the machine that I'm working on. That NCSU AP Trust Baggett tool bagged those files, and they've already been transferred over to the AP Trust bucket, University of Miami's S3 bucket, for AP Trust to pull in. And we can actually, let's see if that's happened yet. Because I've actually mentioned it to the development team, but because we have so many objects in AP Trust, loading our institutional, institutional view page on the AP Trust website takes a really long time, because it's querying all of the objects and then doing some calculations on them to display like size and types of files and things. So it takes a really long time for our kind of institution homepage to pop up on the AP Trust website, which is what we're waiting for.
So you're immediately deleting your local copy of the bag as soon as it's up, because it's chained to that command of successful?
Correct. Yeah, so if the command successfully completes, then it will execute that. But if the command fails, it skips that end portion. Yeah, originally I actually had each of these steps. I would do them independently, but I was just doing the same 3 steps over and over, so I just chained them together. And they do the exact same thing. Here you can see that the bag, which was a tar file, including all of those files, successfully made it to AP Trust. So it's in the course of now ingesting that into the AP Trust backend. Thus far, that's for the most part the extent of the workflow. So what I do is usually I'll wait for this to finish, although I don't really need to, but when the bags are a little bigger, I usually don't want to kind of inundate AP Trust with too many giant bags all at once. So I usually give it a little bit of breathing space before, although Andrew has said there's no need to do that.
But I've done it all the time. I just send multi-terabytes to them.
So there are definitely some things we're looking towards in the future. And let's see, I should say this process has worked well for. So I've transferred a couple of hundred collections using this. We've gone up to, I just pushed our largest collection. We've pushed 2.6 terabyte bag, and really kind of I would say thus far with the practical workflow, the only hiccup that I've had is I need about 3 times as much storage space as files in order to do the bagging because of the way the NCSU tool works. And I think it would be a consequence of most other bagging tools. But you need plenty of storage in order to duplicate the collection a couple of times. So it took quite a while for our central IT to get me. I've got 15 terabytes currently attached to the server. So it took a little while for that. But once that happened, I've been able to move these the larger collections without any trouble. Looking towards the future, our primary goal is to finish up moving all of these collections, and then I need to start taking a look at my plan is to do probably monthly random exports from AP Trust, pick a collection, pull it back out, and compare it against what we have stored on the archive server. I haven't started that yet because I haven't gotten all of our collections into AP Trust yet. But that's one issue I'll definitely be looking at in the near future. So it's very simple. It's a little bit of manual work, but compared to what it was going to take me to put into fixing this Python tool, I don't know Python. I know a little bit of Ruby. But it was going to I put some decent effort into working on this tool that we had, which would manage all of this for one to do. And the amount of effort I have to put into running this process is pretty minimal. So I found that it's been really good for us. It has been low on the hassles.
How are you tracking what collections have sent and when you sent it? Or do you put anything in metadata anywhere? Is it the spreadsheet?
Right now, the spreadsheet is kind of the source of truth for what is in AP Trust, other than AP Trust itself. But yeah, right now, this spreadsheet, and I've learned some small lessons. The spreadsheet isn't on my local machine; it's hosted on Box, so other people can access it. But it does have the downsides of kind of everyone is very familiar with in terms of using spreadsheets to manage projects, but it also is kind of the simplest tool at hand.
Overall, this is very, very similar to what we do at Penn State. We don't use the NCSU AP Trust Baget. We use the standard Baget and add some tag files for AP Trust and line to the bag info for AP Trust. But I have put it together in a single script that you just pass some arguments to for the the collection ID, where's the path, and the description. So quick and dirty on Linux gets the job done.
Yeah, that was basically the mentality when I went about putting it together. So I think our charge was basically to save, put these collections in AP Trust and get them safe as quickly as possible. So, I definitely think there's some room for improvement in the system, but it's pretty simple. So,
How are you doing metadata? Are you just pulling down whatever content DM has and stuffing it in the bag, or do you have something else on the archive server?
no, the archive server has like a metadata export from Content DM. That's where it gets stored with everything. So it just comes over. It's already in the folder, so it gets pulled over when the initial rsync happens.
Are there other questions? Everyone should be able to talk if you unmute yourself. I made everyone panelists so people could ask questions and whatnot. Except for, unfortunately, the one person on the phone. I'm sorry.
Hi, this is Dina Sokolova. I'm wondering if you're keeping your original tips on your servers, and in AP Trust, do you keep the originals in your repository after you put the same files to AP Trust?
Yeah, we do keep all of the original tips, all of the kind of archival masters. Those are all stored on what we call the archive server, which is a file server. They're not stored in Content DM. They're just stored on the file server, and that's backed up locally, but still within the South Florida region. And so, of course, obviously, given natural disasters, et cetera, that's kind of that was our motivation to be involved with AP Trust, is to kind of get our collections out of this kind of region of high risk and get them someplace else safely. So we do keep the TIFFs here, and we duplicate them in AP Trust.
So in case something is changed for the collections that you already put into AP Trust, how would you track the difference between what you have on your servers and what you have in AP Trust?
Good question. So that's something I'm about to deal with, and the way that works here is our production team kind of has, it's not technologically tiered, but they have storage that's tiered between use. So we have this archive server, and then they have production storage. So as things are actively worked on, they get moved to the production storage. And so one of the members of the team here in digital production, either the production supervisor or the head of digital production, will basically let me know when, so that happens maybe quarterly, and they'll let me know when a collection that has previously been ingested is changed. And then we can basically run this process again, and AP Trust will, on their side, update the individual files that need to be updated. That is.
So does your spreadsheet track this? Is it reflected in the spreadsheet?
It's not yet, because we actually haven't. As I said, there's a collection that we is kind of in the queue to be transferred, but hasn't been transferred yet. So I actually haven't done that update process. When I do, I'll have to kind of update the spreadsheet to reflect whether the collection has ever been edited.
So when you, and in theory, right, because this hasn't happened yet, but what you would rebag the entire thing, send the whole thing to AP Trust, and then they just add the different files to the original bag. You're not creating a whole new bag and then going and deleting the other one, or versioning it through file naming.
Yeah, that's right. I'll create an entire new bag and transfer the entire bag. I think there is obviously some extra work there, but it's not extra work that I'm doing. You know, honestly, it's the computer that's putting the bag together and everything. Once I kick off that script, I'm really not involved in the process, so I'm not too worried about that. I mean, there is, you know, data transfer and that kind of stuff, but the costs associated with that are, you know, not. You know, they're not such that we need to worry about them right now. So yeah, I would just kick off the process again and let it run again, and have AP Trust handle kind of diffing the new bag and the old bag.
I have I've taken a look at the NCSU AP Trust bag a little bit, and I can read some Python scripts, but I'm not very good at writing Python from scratch. So I sort of shifted gears and used a bash script along with the regular Baggit. But how is this adding the AP Trust specific tags like the bag in, or like the title? Like, how does the collection title get into the bag info here? Because I don't see you passing it as a variable anywhere. So is it like extracting it from the metadata or something?
I believe so. I'd have to dig into it again. I haven't actually looked at the code in the AP Trust Baggit in like over a year since whenever I did that pull request. But yeah, I think it's pulling it from the different metadata that it pulls, that it rsyncs from our archive server.
Are these all content DM collections, or are some of these things that maybe just sit on that archive server, but maybe were never actually published for whatever reason?
As far as I know, they've all been ingested into Content DM. Some of them are not publicly accessible collections, but I believe that they're all available on Content DM to admins. Yeah, there is some room for one of the nice things about using a tool like this is that I have had some issues where you know, I think I use this very simple command. So if there are any kind of aberrations in the file structure or something of the files that I'm moving, that can cause an issue. But because everything is kind of glued together in this way, I can also just take the opportunity to fix it, kind of manually make sure that everything matches. And I've had to do that for, you know, a couple of odd collections because they were in a slightly different file structure than everything else. But again, you know, it's been very minimal in terms of how much time I've had to kind of fiddle with things.
What kind of documentation have you created about the process or the magic behind this or whatever?
That's a good question. So right now I do have this like pleasant README, which explains generally how this works. I do think, though, given my experience, you know, handing this off to someone else who's never who's never like performed the process at all, I'm not sure it would be good enough. And that's something, I think that's one of my actually, it's like one of my annual goals for this year is I need to write the documentation in such a way, because that's basically the problem that I had when I kind of walked onto the project. Was there was a software that transferred these files to AP Trust, but did it in a way that I didn't fully understand, and the documentation wasn't enough for me to kind of figure out what was going on. And obviously I don't want that to happen to anybody else who kind of walks onto this project. So I probably have to flesh it out, but the basics are there.
I had a related question. This is Suzanne from Georgetown. Paul, it seems like you're pretty much doing all of this on your own. Do you think, like, are you guys ever going to get to a point where you're going to need lots of people working on this to send content, or is it a process you can kind of manage yourself and keep the pipeline going?
In terms of like the sustainability of this process in particular, I think I don't know that we would probably involve anybody else with this project beyond like maybe like a specific backup. Someone who would know the process well enough to kind of step in when I'm not around. But I don't think that we have enough content moving to AP Trust that we necessarily would need to involve anybody else. And I do, I don't want to, I don't want to be the, especially unnecessarily, kind of be the point person for this. I don't want to be, the only one who knows how to do it. So I do think it's probably key to get the documentation up to snuff so that anybody could walk in and do it. But I don't think the scope of our collections aren't enough for like a lot of people to be involved in the process.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
How much do you have in AP Trust?
Right now we're up at 20 something. It's 23.7 terabytes. And that should be a little higher, but I accidentally messed up a transfer earlier today. So shortly we'll have something like 27 terabytes in AP Trust, which represents almost all of our kind of archival collections.
I think that's more than anyone. Congrats.
Yeah, we had pushed up a bunch over the course of the last year. I know UVA was going to move a bunch more into AP Trust, but yeah, I think, like I said, we definitely had a specific goal to kind of get our collections out of, into a more safe environment. So we're trying to do that as quickly as possible.
Have you been pretty much doing this full time, like just working on AP Trust stuff, or do you also have, a bazillion other duties that you have to do and committee meetings to attend and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, no, I wish that would be nice. No, I would say it's in fits and starts that I have to pay attention to AP Trust. It does help. I mean, especially with larger collections, it's mostly like I set it and forget it. So I can launch a command and let it run in the background, and I've got plenty of other kind of things to attend to. It is, it gets to be a little bit of I had a little issue when I was doing these really large collections because I was moving collections with something like 250,000 files. And moving that many files, like rsync will take a day almost just to come up with the list. It wouldn't take a day, but it would take 8 hours. It'd take a work day just to come up with the list for rsync to verify which file, whether files have been transferred or not. So that was an extreme case. And then I had there were some hiccups there. So I'd have to start that process and then check the next day to see whether there was an error. It would be a full 24 hours before I, found out whether it worked that day or not. But, I mean, that was, it only took 3 or 4 days, which is really only, like 3 or 4 typo kind of issues. But, it was only a couple seconds each day where I would look at it and figure out, what did I do wrong or what's the issue here, and kick it off again. So, yeah, for the most part, it's a hands-off process. I try not to have anything that I have to tend too closely.
Are there any other questions from the crowd? Well, I don't want to take up more time than might be necessary to free people up for their other things this day. Thank you very much, Paul, for walking us through your practices at Miami. I always really like seeing how other people are tackling this and the choices they make, collection versus object, and how you're making the sausage. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan, for inviting me. I appreciate it. I enjoy sharing with everybody. I know it's not a particularly pretty way to do it, but it does work. It's very practically minded. So hopefully there will be some inspiration for other people. That it doesn't have to be a pretty process. Just get it there, and it works.
Well, thanks for putting this together.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Thanks everyone for attending. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. If you are interested in showing off your AP Trust workflows, please let me know. I'd be happy to sign you up for the next begging webinar. But thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your days. We'll get the recording out soon.